Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Michelle. I'm the Asset Communications Officer. Welcome to the Fundraising Techniques and Strategies for HAPS Part 2. We'll just give around 5 minutes for the rest of the participants to join. Yeah, it's a pleasure to see you all.
Good morning, everyone. Apologies for the small hiccup. Brenda here from ASEC. But so glad you're able to join us. We'll just give 1 minute for anybody who was affected to join us, and then we will start with, we'll get started. I'll have one of our board members, Annie Chungwa, open the session. So at 10:11, we should be able to start. Thank you very much for taking time to spend your morning with us. It's going to be part 2 of a really interesting conversation with Diana. So just give us about 30 more seconds to go, and then Anne will officially start us off on the session. Great, we have about 15 people joining us, and I think we could get started. Anne, are you ready to officially launch the session?
Yes, Brenda. Thank you so much, Brenda, and to all the ASEC fraternity for putting together this wonderful, what we call member capacity and engagement forum. I wish to take this moment to welcome you again to the second part. Yesterday, we had such a very interactive session with more than 60 participants in attendance, and very engaging through our chat button and our Q&A, just getting to learn what are some of these techniques that we need to deploy now when it comes to fundraising. My name is Annie Shomwa, as Brenda has rightfully put it. I sit in the board of ASEC, and it gives me the pleasure of just giving you a small preview, 5 minutes preview of what ASEC is. Remember, this initiative is hosted by ASEC, and it will be good and fair enough for me to let people know what is ASEC and what are we doing before we introduce the guest of today. Allow me to share my screen. I just have a small presentation, just something small, just touching base. I know we had covered this yesterday, but I would like to take you back into this space of what we call entrepreneurship space and innovation. So back then, the space looked very, let me use the word disorganized, not streamlined, not having a harmonized voice. And the people who are acting there in the space decided to form what we call an umbrella body that is able to articulate the issues of people who are playing in this sector. And that is when Association of Startup SME in Kenya was formed. This was officially launched in 21st of May, 2019. So we are an year old, and ASEC is a national association that brings together and represents the interests. Remember, these are the interests of the organizations that are supporting the development and growth of the startups and the SME. So we don't work directly with the SMEs, but we work with the organizations that support the growth and development of the SME. As I had mentioned, we were officially launched in 21st of May, 2019. Now, why then do we exist, or why were we formed? There were so many associations, so many platforms. Why then do we exist? Now, for ASEC, this is very dear to us, is that we aim to create what we call a harmonized voice, a voice of unity to all the players in this ecosystem. So we need to harmonize so that we are able to articulate our issue in one voice. Then we can be heard. And as we exist and we try to give value to our members, we do this in a very basic way, in a 5 platform or 5 objectives. This is policy. We try to do policy and advocacy on issues that revolves around SME innovation, entrepreneurship space, a lot of member capacity building and engagement. I'm sure a lot of you have engaged us in these member engagement forums. We are also very keen when it comes to showcasing our own, showcasing that indeed we have startups, indeed we have entrepreneurs who are innovative in this space, and we showcase them at the international platform. And we do a lot of collaborations and partnership. Remember, it's about synergy. It's about growing together. And ASEC now is the voice that brings together all these platforms so that we can work together and empower our members as we work together. So basically, those are what we call our key objectives. Now, you may be wondering then, why would I need to join? I mean, so many other professional associations, so many organizations. So what is the benefit for me joining ASEC? You as an organization that support SME, you derive value, or you derive benefit from the objectives that we have spelled out. And how we do this through our collaborative arm, through our partnership arm, you're able to build what we call your brand visibility into the ecosystem. People get to know so and so exists in this system. And as you also do that, you tend to build your pipeline of other ecosystem players. You get stakeholders who are also involved, who have a voice, who are there passionate, trying to help and work with the SME. You get access to this pipeline. You also get to do what we call program implementation. When we are sourcing and we are looking for partners to implement project, now that you are aware, now that you are part of this ecosystem, it becomes very to source and see who are these people that we can work with. On the other arm around capacity building and member engagement, remember it's about peer-to-peer learning. There's a lot of workshops around, a lot of round tables that we have created, a lot of fire chats, just to allow peer-to-peer learning, to allow hubs to hub to learn, interchange. This is how we have been surviving during COVID. This is how we have been also recruiting our members. There's a lot of learning that takes place in these workshops. There's a lot of exchange in terms of knowledge sharing, exchange program, and also we do a lot of co-creation. And a good example is one that we conducted around the code of conduct and standard of how we harmonize in terms of how we deliver our programs. These are some of the benefits that you derive the moment you sign in and you become a member of ASEC. We also do a lot of joint lobbying, and more so, if you may recall, we have what we call, especially the tax issues, the digital taxation that is affecting people. We create our own voice, and that allows us to be heard. We also have a lot of interest when it comes to the SME policy, and some of our key members are also lobbying to be seated in that round table so that we can discuss issues that affect the SME. Also, through the ASEC, it becomes very easy to funnel down what we call timely information and opportunities. We'll get these opportunities either from funders, opportunities from people who are looking to do programs, opportunity for learning and networking. And then it becomes very easy for us to channel this opportunity. And if you are a member, you get the benefit of getting this information on first time, on a very timely basis. We also have very access to local and foreign pipeline or actors into the system, because they say, is there an umbrella body that articulates issues of SME that we can work through? Then it becomes very easy to channel and give you access to all these ecosystem player. So that's just a brief preview of what ASEC is, and it's just even an issue of just call to action. If you're not a member, this is what you are missing out. And these are some of our members. These are people that you can resonate with. We have had a lot of people showing interest. We have also, this is also group, some of the members that we have been working with, and it's just a call to action. Please, this is what you are missing out. Join in, and I know our program, Brenda, program director Brenda, will be of assistance. If you log in onto the website, you'll also get in the application forms. You get to interact with our newsletter. You get to interact with our event and get to know what is ASEC. But please reach out to us, then we can work together. And in line with that, this is also the second part of what we are calling fundraising, what we call fundraising technique and strategies for Hub. We had this yesterday, and today is the second part and the final part, where we have Diana Geshanga taking us through. Diana Geshanga, if you may allow me, let me just stop my screen sharing, just a minute. Allow me, this is a bit of technical there. Diana Geshanga is the founder and the managing director of what we call Private Equity Support, which is a consulting firm that has also very geared and working towards small and growing SME. And the issue is that they prepare them to scale and get ready for investor readiness. And who else is in a better position to talk to us? Who else is in a better position to interact with, especially during this season where everybody, I'm sure your SMEs are calling you, those people who operate in there, they're calling you. How do we fundraise? How do we get capital? How do we grow at such a time? So who is a better person than the superstar herself when it comes to fundraising? That is Diana Geshanga. Thank you, Diana, and take it over from me.
And with that introduction, I feel like I need to hire you personally to be my champion. Wow, what a wonderful introduction. And thank you very much, Anne, for those very kind words. And as Anne said, the importance of being members of ASEC cannot be understated. The ability for us to do so much through one organization is one of the key benefits, other than the capacity building, such as the sessions that we're having today. Some of the aspects that we might raise, or some of the aspects that might come up as recommendations through the engagements that we have, discussions that we also have here, or in other fora, it is easier and it is easier to channel through ASEC, and there's a higher likelihood of success if we go through the organization. So what I'll do is, allow me to quickly share my screen. Just let me know on the chat if you're able to see this. Then what I'll do is I'll put it on full screen. We'll do it as a slideshow. Right, so I'm just looking at the time, and I feel that we have slightly under an hour, but I believe that is sufficient time for us to be able to cover this topic extensively. Thank you to those who were there yesterday and have joined us again today. We appreciate you keeping with us both yesterday and today. And for those who are joining us today, you're lucky in that we will have a quick recap of the session that we had yesterday before we go into, I know, what is really critical for everybody, the funder engagement process and practical tips. As mentioned yesterday, we want to keep the sessions as interactive as possible. So please shoot your questions on the Q&A button, give us your feedback or comments within the chat, so that at least if there's something that you want us to cover while we are still having the presentation, we will be in a position to. And ASEC will be able to, when I pose for questions, they'll read out your questions, and so I can be able to address or clarify something as we continue. So we're going to start with a quick recap. I remember yesterday we talked about the fact that fundraising is both an internal facing and an external facing process. And the reason we were focusing on the internal process, or the internal focused process of preparing to fundraise, is because we will be needing some of those documents that we had generated through the internal focused sessions for the external engagement session with investors. So remember very quickly, we went through this diagram, the 7 domains model by Mullins. We need to be able to clarify what's the unique value offering we have for our participants or our entrepreneurs, whether in the hubs or accelerators is. We need to be clear what sections of the economy we are active in, from a macro level, how that section performs, what are its challenges. From a micro level, what is the profile of your target customer, what is he struggling with, how are you able to help? Is he in a position, depending on the stage of business he is in, to be able to chip in for some of the services, or is it something that you have to offer on a quasi pro bono basis? What does this mean for you in terms of the strategy as a hub or accelerator? Understanding all the trends that are happening in the industry that will impact your work as a hub and accelerator. Remember, when you're engaging with the investor, they are taking you as the experts within that industry, so and experts within those sectors. So they want to feel, when they're engaging with you, that you understand what's happening on a macro level within the sectors. If it's logistics, if it's agriculture, if it's fintech, they need to understand that you are able to articulate all the trends that are happening. You're aware of people in the industry who are doing similar or same things, and you're able to articulate why you're different. And then the other critical thing that we did yesterday was to say, with the strategy that we are developing, or we've developed, and we've said, this is what we are focusing on, this is what we want to do, How is your team capacity to deliver those services? Remember, if you're saying I am a fintech accelerator or hub, or I'm in logistics, who in your team has had track record or experience, or even academic, has an academic background in some of the sectors that you're saying you're able to help businesses? Because you cannot be selling what you do not have the capacity or the track record to implement. If you tell me your hub or accelerator is specifically looking at farms within the life sciences, you know, when we talk about biotechnology, and no one in that particular farm or space has experience in biotechnology, no one has an academic background in that, then there's a disconnect between what you're saying you're doing and your capacity for your team to be able to deliver this. And when we talk about capacity, we're also talking about not just the leadership, the people who the entrepreneurs are talking about. There is something we will come across later, and we're talking about the funds, some of the clauses or restrictions that they might have when you're given the grant funding. Some might actually require some specific people to remain with you during the during the implementation of that program. So it's important for you to understand, do we have a layer beneath the management that is able to support in the execution of the strategy? Why did we say we want to focus on internal prep? Is because it helps us justify our ask. If I can clearly see, this is what I want to do over the next 5 years, these are the key milestones I'm going to achieve, these are the funding and team requirements. Because remember, resourcing is not just the capital, it's the ability to have the team that can execute. Then when you come and ask a funder for, say, a $500,000 grant, then you'll be able to demonstrate based on your strategy and the budget that you shall put together where this money is going to, how it's going to be utilized. And that helps you with it helps increase your chances of success. Secondly, it allows you to have better alignment between the farm and the funder. Remember, some funders have programs that only run for a certain period of time. So if a funder has a 5-year program and you approach him in year 4, yet everything you want to do or the money you need needs to stretch you for at least maybe a minimum of 3 or 4 years, you automatically know this funder will not be able to push me maybe beyond year 1. Because if I've not utilized the portion of funds that he has given to the farm, I might be required to return it. Or I do not want to enter into a scenario where I am managing so many funders and all of them are giving me bits and pieces of funding that expire at different times. So I spend most of my time fundraising as opposed to creating the value add that we've said we are creating for businesses. Thirdly is it will cut down the time taken when engaging with the funders. First of all, we need to understand that, especially when you're starting out, when you start engaging with funders, it is not a process for the faint-hearted. It'll take long. Naturally, it does take long. Why? Because other than looking at your programs or your initiatives in terms of what you're trying to do and how that relates, they're also trying to look at you in terms of who is this who's approaching me? Who is this person in organization X? What are their ideals? How are they aligned to their organization? How are they committed? Can I trust them? So it is also about relationship building. So if you don't have the internal prep process done, then as opposed to spending most of that time trying to create relationships because there's clarity in your documents. Remember, we said your documents are singing the same, so you know everything is reflecting the song from the same hymn sheet. You'll be spending your time just going back and forth. And remember, when a funder gets the sense that you're not really prepared, you might have been on the priority list. He's like, oh, I like this idea. Or she says, I think this farm is excellent. But then the frustration of every time they ask you for a document, you're not able to provide it, or you're not providing an up-to-date document, or it's not complete. That leads to frustration. And they say, if I'm struggling this much at the beginning and all I'm asking for is documents, can you imagine the problems I will have if I'm following up on money issues? So it creates a very bad impression. And then the last thing is it allows you to be very targeted. You know, not all funders are suitable for you. And the reason we say this, and as we'll see later on as we discuss the investor universe, there are funders who specifically focus on a type of organization or a different or a specific sector, specific countries. So it's important for you to, based on the internal process that we had talked about, to be very targeted about who you're talking to, because some funders you will approach will wonder, why is this person reaching out to me? When it's very clear, even from the terms of the website, that we don't even do organizations, we work directly with governments, or he's asking me for a $50,000 grant, and on my website, it is very clear that the minimum you give is 2 million. So this is something that will allow you to be more targeted and use your time more efficiently. So what I'm gonna do is I need to launch the poll. So as we had requested yesterday, what these polls help us do is gather not only insight for the presentation, but insight for ASEC to utilize in terms of their engagement with the rest of the ecosystem. So try and be as forthcoming as possible. So very quickly, the questions will be, how many of us on the call have successfully raised funding? And then secondly, which are the other sources of funding? Is it grants? Is it high net worth investors? Is it corporates, like from the Microsofts or Googles or others? And then for those who say others, in the chat, please write which others this are. And then what will happen is ASEC will now read this. So I'm launching the first question. So please let us know, the guys on the call, how many of you have successfully raised funding? Okay. I see only 10 of us have voted. Come on, guys. It's important for us to know where you are at. So I'm gonna give this just 15 more seconds. Please vote. How many of you have successfully raised funding for your hubs or accelerators? No one else wants to chip in into this question, because it also helps us know which areas we can focus on. All right, I'm giving this just 10 more seconds and then we can move on to the second question. All right, so, okay. Then based on what we have seen is only 11 people have answered. So half of you have not participated in the poll. We will not ask why, we will assume there's a good reason. So about 5 of you on the call have said that you've successfully raised funding. And then 6 of you on the call have said that, or 55%, you've said that you've not yet raised funding. Okay, so now we will go to the second one. So just allow me to, all right, what we're going to do is I'll request ASEC to just confirm that we have the second poll uploaded, so that we can find out whether or not where or who these sources of funding were, and then we can come back to those, that particular section. So allow me to continue. So the funder engagement process, the first thing that we always say is you need to be clear about who your funder universe is. And when I talk about the funder universe, I'm talking about the potential market of the funders that you can potentially reach out to as a hub or accelerator. Remember, today we are not focusing on SMEs. We are talking about how hubs and accelerators can reach out and get funding. So when we talk about funder universe, a lot of people keep asking, is there like a database where all these names and details are put together? So maybe that's one of the things that we can do as ASEC, is potentially come up with a database that allows people to just find out who are the funders out there, what sectors are they looking at, what countries are they looking at. But one of the ways that someone can find out which funders are actually within or active within the area is look at all the people who you know who have received funding. Look at all the programs that have received funding. Who have they received funding from? And normally you'll find at the bottom of the websites of these accelerators or hubs, you'll find these logos of the investors that they've worked with, or the funders that they've worked with. Secondly, the other thing is to look at resource websites. We have ASEC as a resource website. We have ANDE as a resource website. Look at the funders who are active within the region. They are doing papers. They are contributing to trainings. Keep a track record of this. And then keep a database of this so that you're able to keep tracking who is active, what new program are they doing, how does that help me. Sign up to the newsletters. A lot of these funders, if you look at them, they have already some mailing lists where they say, you know, just sign up and you'll be kept up to date in terms of the areas that we're looking at, the call for proposals, and then understand what these guys are looking for. So when you're putting together your funding request, I mean your database of funders, understand what is the MasterCard Foundation focusing on. Is it a programmatic approach? Is it do they only engage with call for proposals? What does Agidius do? How does it help people? Does Agidius give money directly to the clients we have in the hubs, or can they help only organizations? What does GIZ do? You know, how do they work? You know, how does, say, the small foundation work? What are the focus areas? What are the countries? How do they, who are their preferred partners? We know a lot of larger scale programs are done through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So if you have a grant request for $10,000, it is unlikely that Bill and Melinda Gates will directly give you that $10,000 because they write big ticket sizes and they give other organizations or implementing partners. And those implementing partners then run programs to which you as a hub or accelerator can then apply to. So this is just a snapshot of some of the people who are within the ecosystem. Some specifically look at areas such as health. Others will look at agriculture, value chain related aspects. Others will look across various sectors. So they have 5-year strategies that maybe say, we are focusing on the wash industry. Others might be there, say, for the Shell Foundation. They might be having a focus on things like e-mobility. So the one thing I'll keep saying is, even as you rely on maybe externally generated databases that keep all these details of who is funding what and when and what programs there are, I'd say internally as a hub and accelerator, it is in your best interest to keep track of these guys. Sign up for these newsletters, or at least have a habit, like in fundraising, what we normally do is keep checking, you know, say, put aside a day a week, or rather a few hours in a day a week, and say, every Friday, the first 3 hours is I check, or 2 hours, I check this website, I see what's happening, I see who I can connect to on LinkedIn, I see which contact we might have in common. Most of these guys have representative offices here. Can I find if there's a way to make what we call a courtesy call, you know, to let them know, hey, I am Hub X, this is what I do, this is what I'm working on. Even though they're not yet maybe having a program that might be of the size that your hub or accelerator can participate in, remember, yesterday when we talked about social capital, it's not only about who you know, but who also knows you. So if someone say you get contacts at MasterCard Foundation, keep them warm, you know, send them information every once in a while, you know, don't flood their emails, especially with something that might not be necessarily relevant. What you're trying to do is attain visibility and create relationships. And the thing in fundraising, we used to have a running joke when we were doing our fundraising for our funds. When you start fundraising, you'll find that in the first and second year, as you interact with some of these funders, they will not come directly to you and request that, can we talk to you? They'll just seem to want to find out, okay, who are you? Which organization are you working with? And then if you try and push, you'll find that they're sort of giving you a sign of, it's okay. This is not the first time we're engaging with new people, just relax. So after you've gone for the same conference a second, the third time, and people are like, this person is still here, then they take it as a signal that you're probably someone who's going to be there for the long run. So we used to say, I am an undergraduate, or I'm a master's, or I'm a PhD in fundraising for this particular conference, because you've been seen frequently. So my encouragement to you is, don't get discouraged. When you keep attending these networking events and then you think, I met someone from this foundation, I talked to him, I sent my email. All he did was he called me for a meeting. We discussed, I told them what I was doing, and then they were like, okay. And then nothing came out of that meeting. If fundraising was easy, everyone would do it. The point is, you have an opening, you have a contact, you have someone who you can keep working with to let them know what you're doing. Cultivate that relationship, because fundraising takes long, and it's all about relationships and what you're putting forward as the unique value proposition. So we've understood the universe. We've understood that it is important for you to be looking for these people or through these people's or funders' websites. It's important for you to try and make connections within those organizations. And it's also important for you to talk to the firms that you know that these people have funded, so that you know, even though Funder X has said this is what they focus on their website, is there something that's coming up? The person who is already working with that funder might be able to tell you. You might know this guy is really focused on reporting, so that even if it's not very clear in their website, because you've engaged with someone they've funded, you know, when you're approaching Funder X, please be clear about how you're going to be doing the reporting, because they're very specific on this. It's really about how you put together the information. So yesterday there was a question that came up. What is the engagement process? What documentation do I need? How do I start? So taking you back, remember when we were doing all this internal prep, there are certain documents that the internal prep process will allow you to come up with. The most critical one is this. From this process that we went through yesterday, you will ideally have at least a 3-year or a 5-year strategy. You will ideally have the areas or the milestones that you want to achieve in the various sectors, and how you propose to do it, and what the unique value add that you're creating for the participants in your hubs and accelerators are going to be deriving from either your programs or your initiatives. You'll also be able to show what are your funding requirements, how much, what portion of that is organization related, what portion of that is programmatic related, and on top of that, how you're going to be building up the team, because no one expects you to have the full team on day one. Depending on whatever your milestones are, that is the sort of team that you need to have in place when trying to do that program. So from here, we have a strategy document, we have a budget, we have projections in terms of how this is going to be, and we already have a team capacity plan, or rather organogram that's future looking. So with those documents in place, when you've come here and identified who are my potential funders, and please don't say, I'm only going to start with a list of 5. Fundraising, half the battle is persistence. There are people who have told me no in 1 year, and not no because it's not the sector or what they were looking at. They just said no, they didn't think that potentially the deals we had brought were of interest to them. Then I found out what it is they like and focus on. The next time we had an opportunity like that, we took it, it became a maybe. The third time we had an opportunity similar to that, they actually invested. So if you get a no, and the no is not because you're not presenting the right thing, or you're not within the sector or within the target, they just are not able to work with you at that particular point. Persistency. Keep at it, not stalk. Keep at it. There's a difference. There's a difference between antagonizing someone, and there's a difference between keeping in touch with someone. So try and create a balance between the two. So ideally, what this exercise will allow you to do is come up with a short list of funders who can either help your program or your programmatic initiatives, or they can help you as an organization. Remember, there are some funders that work with organizations and others work with programs. Then the first thing you do, and we'll go into the documentation slide, when you're engaging with a funder, unless it's not, because remember, there are times when we have a call for proposal. So there's a funder who has come out and said, I'm interested in this sector. I'm putting out a call for proposal or an expression of interest. And then they're very specific about the information they want. If it's outside of a call for proposal, it is just of your own initiative. First, develop a short summary. Please, please, do not send people 50-page slide documents or decks or 100-page documents. Remember, they first are trying to know because they had not engaged with you before, right? So based on the funder universe exercise that you've undertaken, do you have a specific contact you've made contact with? Do you have, or is it a cold call? You know, so if there's a specific contact you've already made a connection with, and you've maybe exchanged introductory emails, you've said, hey, I'm working on something. Usually what they'll say is, send me a brief. This is not your opportunity to flood their emails, because remember, these funders are already looking at so many proposals. Some of them are proposals that are in advanced stages. So when you come in and send them like a 50 or 100-page document, when they've never interacted with your fund or with your program or your hub accelerator before, they'll say, okay, received, but you'll fall to the bottom of the priority list. Because remember, there are other things that he's doing that are at a more advanced stage and are likely to be a priority for them. So we will go into what the contents are, but in such a scenario, develop a short 2-pager to maximum 5-pager, and then send this, right, to your contact and say, here is basically an outline of what we are trying to do, what we are trying to achieve, and how this relates to you. The mistake people do is you develop the same thing and then you send it to different funders. Remember, funders might be in the same sector. They might be looking at different things, but in terms of the granular aspect of the key performance indicators that they are tracking, they could be very different. So whenever you're sending your proposal to a funder, take time to understand. If someone is saying, I am interested in the clean energy sector, and our key issue or our key area of focus is job creation. And then another funder is saying, we're interested in the clean energy sector, but our key focus is to get minimum viable products that are solar-based out. You will not send the same proposal to these guys, even though they're in the same sector. What you will do is tweak, depending on whether your program addresses that, to address those minute points. So please make sure that you have a look at exactly what's important and have this reflected. Then people do this, they send an email and then they don't follow up. The same way you will get emails after you've gone on holiday and you come in and find it's 900. How many of you just come, click all and say mark as read? If it was really important, I'm sure they'll follow up. And on this, and in this area, in this era of work from home, or as people were saying, leave from work, a lot of engagements, a lot of emails are being sent. And so it is very easy for someone to miss out on your email, not because they ignore it. Probably they were like, oh, this looks interesting. Another email urgent comes in and they completely forget. Once you've sent that, keep following up for feedback. Send an email or even call, you know. Some people sit back and say, I've not been responded to. No, follow up, because you never know how that person is actually dealing with at that point. And then when you get the feedback, remember, that feedback is not, yes, we are going to fund. It is, yes, this is interesting, or yes, this is not, this is interesting, but we have a few concerns, or no, this is not within our scope. So when you're giving that feedback, always try and find out what is it that is working for this funder. So what do they like about the proposal? What are their key concerns? Could it be an M&E issue? Could it be how long the program is taking? Could be a fact that it is not clear what the value add or the benefits are? Try and receive that feedback. And when you're getting that feedback, get both the good and the areas of concern or the bad. Then initiate that continued engagement by saying, thank you for your feedback. We would like to work on this. We think it's areas that we can easily address, and then we would like to re-engage with you. And then the funder can tell you, actually, yes, in fact, next time, if you can address this, why don't you give me a more detailed proposal? At that particular point, ask them, is there a particular format that you have? There are some organizations which on their website, they'll show you, when you're submitting an initial report, please use this format. If you're giving us a detailed proposal, please use this format. Others, they'll do it online. So they'll just send you a link and say, yeah, sure, send your further proposal, just filling it in online. If none of those guides exist, then go back and ask them what particular format, what information would you like to see in the detailed submission, so that you're submitting it in a way that is of interest to them. The other thing to think about is, once you've had that discussion and they've said, yes, this might be interesting, also use that meeting to understand, or that call to understand, as I'm working on a further proposal, what is the likelihood of the next steps? Meaning, as an organization or funding organizations, what are you guys currently working on? Are you able to give my further proposal a more detailed look, or is this a busy season? When do I reach out to you? Some of them will be very honest and say, hey, we're evaluating so many proposals. Even if you send me something detailed tomorrow, chances are highly unlikely that I'll have the time to look at it. Why don't you do this? Send me maybe a month from now. My desk will be easier and I'll be able to give that attention. Please take that advice, because they're being very honest to you and saying, I'm not saying don't send, but to be honest, I'm not going to be able to look at your proposal before this specific date. Say, thank you very much. Diarize, put it in your diary, and then what you do in the interim as you're working on that proposal, just keep him updated or keep her updated. Drop them a weekly email and say, hey, I hope everything is fine. As discussed, we're going to be sending our proposal on the 31st of March. You know, hey, everything is great. We've actually just addressed that issue. Find something relevant to see. So you'll be popping in the email, and what you're doing is keeping yourself on top of mind, so that by the time that 31st reaches and he looks and he's like, he's trying to remember, or she's trying to remember that conversation, they can't. But the emails are able to keep the engagement warm. Find out what the timelines are and what their decision-making process is. Remember, for you, you want to know if ordinarily you do quick turnaround, for those that do. If it takes you 4 to 6 months to make a decision, what is that process? So it's important for you to find out what the decision-making process is, because it helps you manage your expectations and also understand how this impacts your program or your initiatives. Some people will say, if you're prepared, it will take 6 months. And I like that rider, if you're prepared. Because they've been in scenarios where it takes longer because of the dance. You remember the dance we were talking about here on this image? Because you're not prepared, you've not done your internal preparations, your documentation is in a mess, you're not able to send the right information at the right time in the right format, or it is not updated. So it takes a longer time and it's frustrating for the funder. So find out what their process is. Who are the decision-making units? If I give you my proposal, my further proposal, what are the steps that it takes? So they'll tell you an initial committee sits, we discuss, we come back to you, then we follow up with another committee, and this is a committee of so-and-so. Then based on that committee, if they say yes, you then proceed to now proper discussions. If they say no, we'll come back and tell you maybe to resubmit. Understand the process, the timelines, and the expectations from you. Because sometimes they can tell you, this is a process, and then you don't understand. Then maybe you're told you have a week to share maybe some very huge proposal or very detailed program approach that you might not be able to prepare in a very short time to the best that you can. So understand that. Understand what their deal breakers are. And what is a deal breaker? Those of you who've been involved in SMEs and venture capital or early stage funders have come in and say, we are interested in working with your SMEs, or I mean to invest in your SMEs, but there are certain deal breakers, and deal breakers occur during negotiations. There's something someone says, it doesn't matter how good the deal is, I cannot accept this particular aspect. One of the deal breakers could be reputational issues. If a funder is dealing with you, then they find out that you've had some issues of fraud, mismanagement, that's a reputational reputational risk. They'll tell you, if you've already been convicted of a crime, financial crime, or you've been noted, or there's a history of you misusing funds, we are not able to work with people like that. So find out what their deal breakers are. right? And then even for you as a program, as an accelerator or a hub, what are your deal breakers? You remember we kept that feedback that we were reading from that document, the World Bank document, where it said that the grants are sort of really framing the sort of interventions that hubs and accelerators are able to do. Now, let's be very realistic. When you're starting out, you really don't have that much negotiating power, right? You're happy to get the funding. Why? Because you really don't have the track record. You've not really shown the way you can scale your program, and the grants that you're likely to get are the smaller ones that are very specific or regimented in terms of how they'll do. There's nothing wrong with that. However, there must be a point where you say, if the grant you get deviates so significantly from the program that you were trying to put together, do you then try and put a new program to address that grant's particular focus? Or do you step back and say, unfortunately, my program cannot be changed this way? And the reason I'm saying this is sometimes as a person on the ground, you understand where the problem is because you're the one interacting with entrepreneurs. And you know, even if I get money, but the money asks me to do X and do Y, I'm not really helping my entrepreneurs. So it is up to you in your wisdom to decide, do I then get the grant because I do need a history of having grants, or I get the grant so that I'm able to do something that will help me address what it is I'm thinking of? Or do I then go back to the funder and say, this is my program, but I don't think this program will be able to suit the grant funding that you're proposing. If you want us to do this, I can craft this, then you look for a different grant for that program that you had put together. It is in your wisdom to decide. The other thing is always follow up. Every time you send documentation, drop an email, not like every day or every 2 hours, because then you just irritate people. Follow up like every 3 days or even on a weekly basis, call, email. And then what I've always realized is try and find out who else in the team you can also connect with so that you don't have a single point of contact. So when you have the initial call, if there's an initial meeting, have connections with the other team members so that you can say, if I can't get X, I can ask Y, please check on this or check on that. Then they're able to champion for you, even though the person who's leading or reviewing the particular application might be just that one person. Now, we come to what we call the initial screening. And this again varies depending on which funder is there. And again, based on the information you got in terms of what their timelines and processes are, it will vary, but this is the basic flow that is there in common. Whenever they're reviewing your program or your proposals, you'll have a lot of engagement opportunity. They'll want to get into the nitty-gritties of understanding what is your methodology, how are you going to execute this on the ground, how are you dealing with the risks, how are you going to address variations, because as we all know, whenever you have a program, there's what you had planned and then there's what happens on the ground. So this is exactly what they want to do. The other thing they'll want to do is come and meet with your management. And this is the importance of this. If what you're currently doing cannot be supported by the capacity, skills, and track record of your team, you're already starting on a back footing. Because I'm coming to find out, I like this program, I like what you guys are thinking of doing. Can I look and see who is the team behind this? Who are the team members who are going to be responsible? Now, remember, you have the people who are already there. And then, because it's not like you have access to a lot of funding, they are the people who will come in later. Maybe if you're getting grant funding to hire maybe a full-time employee, make that distinction. But if the gap is very wide, then what happens is it becomes a hard sell. Why are you telling me you're doing something in life sciences, and yet when I come to meet the team, there's no one with track record or even close or relatable track record in that? I can see we have a hand raised. Was someone raising a hand? I'm just trying to see. I thought I saw someone. Okay. What I could do is maybe stop here for some questions. Any questions so far? Any questions? Asek, maybe you could handle this. In case there are any questions, you could unmute.
Hi, are there any questions? I can see
I
that
see that there was someone who raised a hand, Jerry or something.
Okay. I see Ruth Kaveka, she's joined a bit late. She's asking if there'll be a recording. There'll be a recording. There are no questions as yet.
Okay, great. We'll continue. Thank you for that. So the other thing is you need to also, at this particular stage, the funders will also give you an indication of what their in-house rules and processes are. And when I talk about this, if they have a very strong or robust M&E component, they'll try and give you an idea of what sort of information they're looking for. If they have reporting requirements, this is a point where you actually ask what your reporting requirements are. Are there templates that guide you, or will they give you like a broad guide and then you sort of see how to fill that in? So it's important for you to try, even as they're coming to get information from you, you try and get as much information so that you're able to understand what the funder will require from you. If there are templates you can use, or if not templates that you can use, develop a template in advance or in anticipation, so that when your grant is approved, you also have templates for reporting that are actually approved. Okay, so I see a question here from Cindy. Thank you, Cindy. What's the etiquette around cold calling or emailing outside RFPs? Right. So one of the things I'll say is, you remember we came in here in our previous slides, just 1 second. So remember when we were talking about finding the funder universe and trying to identify if you have a call, if you have a contact, or if you have someone in common who can connect you to someone, so that at least if you're sending your emails, at least it's someone to whom you know. So one of the things I found out about cold calling, it's very difficult, I'll say this, because in fundraising, it's about that relationship, that network, but it doesn't mean you cannot do cold calling. What you do when you're doing cold calling is, first of all, go through the website. Just be very clear. Some people have the names of the people who are in the organization on the website. This guy is in charge of programs, this guy is in charge of funding, this lady is in charge of, so the website will already tell you who works in what particular sector, so that when you're calling, you're not handed over to the person who's doing finance, because that will really not help you. Then once you do that, go on their LinkedIn profile, send a connection request. But in addition to that, look at the profile of the person. Where have they worked before? What was their role before? What is their academic background? And why is this important? If someone has, say, a background in statistics and mathematics, already tells you this is analytical mind. Then, if he's a person in charge of M&E in that organization or foundation, then you already know his analytical thinking is something that he has carried out with. So he'll be someone, when he's asking questions, he's likely to go into the details of how you're structuring, how you approach. If you have a conversation with him, even on a cold call, be prepared to go onto a very technical level. And that is something we used to do in fundraising. Am I talking to someone who has a quants background? Am I talking to someone who has a deal-making background? Because that would already tell you this person has expertise in this area. If I am going to be talking to them, they are likely to focus on questions that derive from that background. So that is part of your prep. Know who are your likely candidates. So by the time you're cold calling that organization, you already know, if I can't talk to so-and-so, I'll talk to, request to speak to so-and-so. And because this person's background is in this, I'm likely prepared for those type of questions. If this other person's background is in that, I already have questions, or I have answers prepared in a format to address their particular technical background. Talk to the receptionist. They'll give you a lot of information, at least in my experience. Just say, hi, I'm talking from Small Foundation. I'm calling Small Foundation, or I'm calling EC. I'd like to speak to so-and-so, you know, with authority. And then of course they'll be like, are they expecting your call? You're like, no, I'm just following up on some initial contact that was initiated. You're not lying. It was on LinkedIn, initial contact initiated, right? Then if they connect you to the person, remember, one, this person doesn't know you from Adam or Eve. Two, they were not expecting to have a call from you. So don't just regurgitate everything. You know, that thing of, oh, I'm so happy you're on the phone. Pa, 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 pa. No. The same way you usually tell your entrepreneurs, what's your elevator pitch? As a hub and accelerator, if you bump into the head of a foundation when you're both shopping or you're social distance queuing in Java or in the supermarket, because you've seen the phone, you've seen his face on or her face on LinkedIn, are you going to let that opportunity go? No, you're going to introduce yourself. But remember, don't try and scare people off or put people on alert. So the first thing I'd say about cold calling is have that elevator pitch ready. And remember, you don't just start, oh, hi, my name is Lala. Introduce yourself, calmly get into that conversation. My name is so-and-so, I'm calling from this organization. I actually try to connect with you on LinkedIn. The guy or girl will say something, or lady will say something. Then you'll be like, do you just have 5 minutes? Because I just wanted to make an initial introduction. I'm looking to send you just an executive summary of something we've worked on, because we've seen that your organization is currently looking for proposals in this sector. Who doesn't have 5 minutes? Yeah, I have 5 minutes. Then great. Elevator pitch. This is what we are doing. This is how we want to do. If this is on interest, I'd like to understand if I can just send you a summary, or if there's somewhere or someone you'd like to refer me to, then I can send them the documentation and we can engage. Remember, you're not the pushy salesman on day one. You're not buying a shoe. You're trying to start a relationship. So don't try and overwhelm them with too much information. Just be very clear. This is what I do. This is why I'm getting in touch. Please let me know how best to be able to provide you with further information. They later say, yes, sure, my email is xxxx, send it here. And then you'll be able to ask, great, so when I send it, do you have like a direct number I can reach you on, or would you just prefer for us to do an email? And then maybe we can schedule a meeting. Remember, you're not being stopped at the email, because that's a mistake. We'll be like, oh, thank you. You get the email and you go. Get the email and say, oh, thank you for that. I'll be sending you the information, and I'd like for us to schedule probably a follow-up call. And don't make it like the next day, you know, break it to give him space or her space. Can we have maybe a follow-on call, maybe 2 weeks or 1 week thereafter? Let me know your availability. They'll let you know. So what have you gotten away with? A contact, an email, and a calendar invite that you can send for the first tentative meeting that you have put together. I hope, Cindy, that answers your question. So looking at the time, okay, we have one more question. Oh, great, great. When everything is said and done, you're all happy, you're hugging each other with the potential funders and your team, they like what you're doing, you like them, we're hugging each other and singing Kumbaya, then the truth teller session comes. This is what I call it, due diligence. Due diligence is really a funder or even an investor's way of saying, you have told me you can do X. I'm just confirming that you can. And how am I confirming this? I'm confirming it by looking at your legal, so legal due diligence. Are you really set up in the right way? Do you have the right licenses? Who is in your shareholding? Do you have a politically exposed person? Or is there someone in your shareholding who had some fraud issues some time back, but you don't see him as management? But when we look at your CR12, there he is, holding, lo and behold, like 50 or 60% of your hub or accelerator. Do you have any legal issues? Are you being sued by other funders, or are you being sued by your entrepreneurs? Secondly, financial. So you told us you've been performing this way, or this is what you do. So do you have management reports? Are your audited accounts up to date? Do you have policies in terms of how to manage your finances? Which bank accounts do you have? Do you have a specific account for funders? Is it possible? Are you using a bank that is solid, or is it a bank that has been having challenges? Commercial. What is your strategy? We agree that you've presented us this paper. We like the fact that you've really gone out and done or have a program that is in an area of interest. How are you operationalizing this? What are your systems and processes internally to support this? And again, reputation. Are you those people when the first milestone, the first funding comes on, and when you've attained the milestone, you're off to the Bahamas? Yes. So what I'll do is I've seen some questions.
Okay, maybe we could proceed with the question from Masim Shai. When a hub or an accelerator is starting, it means that we do not have a track record in terms of things that we can have done, that we can fall back to, but we have at a minimum the interest to work with particular communities. Is this enough to pursue a funder?
So thank you for that very good question. Yesterday, when we were talking about preparation, we say track record is at different levels. Track record can come from what you have studied or undertaken as a study. So for example, if I'm someone who has studied, say, biosciences or something in that line, if I say that I want to do an accelerator or hub in that particular industry, my academic background will contribute to that, because what it says is there is a university somewhere that is confirming that I at least understand the basics of that particular industry. So your academic background contributes to your track record. 2, where you've worked before and what you've done. So if you've worked for an organization, using the same example, that was in the biomedical or related industry, say you were working for Bayer, you have a track record of working maybe in their department where they were trying to come up with new ways of coming up with generic drugs. That is track record that adds up. 2, if you've worked on projects or with other hubs and accelerators in similar areas, then that adds up to your track record. So track record is not a box. It is a series of small steps. Your academic background, projects you've worked on, places you've worked on, and the roles you've held. Because there's some people who have an academic background in something that they do not necessarily execute. So I could be an accountant by training, but I'm a music teacher, right? Or I run a music studio and I want to start a hub for musicians or creative arts. It'll still be track record because I've worked probably for a studio before, or I went and I did music, or I've been doing music for a while. So while my technical background is in accounting, my experience or work experience is in music. There are some areas where you might have an academic background that's different from what you're doing, and your work experience, as much as it's track record, is not sufficient. You need to get some certifications. So there are certain industries such as that. And think about finance and investments as one. We have people who studied history and arts, but they've done like 5 years in finance and investments. You'll find that what they do is they go and augment that work experience by getting a certificate in financial modeling or corporate finance, just to augment and to strengthen your work experience. So all this adds to your track record. So when you're thinking of track record, that is what you're bringing as an individual. So look at the team composition. Together, what years of experience are we bringing in? What type of work experience are we bringing in what sectors, and how does this feed into the hub strategy or the accelerator strategy? I hope that helps. So very quickly, I'll go into this last section. So if you pass the due diligence, then essentially you now go into negotiations in terms of how your the grant will come in, any requirements, then there'll be contracts. Then remember, you don't necessarily, there's some grants where, and this is usually for the large organizations, they are drawn down immediately, but most of them are either drawn down on milestones. So there are certain milestones you need to reach for you to be able to activate the grants, and then you'll be able to be doing your reporting in accordance to the requirements, right? Okay. So let's share the screen. Right, so this is where you are. So what documents are needed? Remember, we were having a discussion about this yesterday. So if it's a solicited proposal, this should read proposal. If it is a solicited proposal, you go according to no time like the present, change it. If it's a solicited proposal, you go according to the terms of reference. And whenever you're doing solicited proposals, remember, there are certain keywords that the funder is using. Please have them reflected within your application or whatever you're putting together. The reason for doing this is because of the bulk of volume of some of the proposals the funders are reviewing. What happens is they have software where your proposals sort of go through an initial screening. And some of the software that is used, what it does is pick to see how many of the words that were in the request for proposal are within your proposal. So what happens is because of having so many requests that they're reviewing, they don't have time to manually go through. So those that the software shortlists are likely the ones that will be looked at. So the key to this is if you're doing a solicited proposal, please use the format that is there, use the word count that is there, use the words or the buzzwords that the funder is using, and most importantly, keep to the limit of the documents. If you've been told 27 pages, if someone is receiving 1,000 proposals, if your proposal is 30 pages and they don't have time to go and see whether your 30 was close to the 28, you're likely to fail just on that simple word count. Submit before the deadline. I know a lot of us think, let's submit on the day of the deadline. If they're expecting many proposals, what happens? And I know you'll see emails. Please let us know if you're planning to submit for the proposal. The ones that come in earlier might start being reviewed by someone who has more time, who's able to really look through and understand what it is you're proposing. So try and submit before the deadline, don't try and buzzer beat. For unsolicited proposals, so this is where you have an idea and you're trying to get the funder to back you. Some have prescribed templates on the website. A lot of people have started putting in, fill in this, so it ends up being an electric form. Fill in the information, attach what is required, keep to the word count. You know, some of them have templates. You just download and you fill in. Please use those templates and attach the documents that are required, because there's a reason why that person is asking for that document. And remember, the reason for part of the internal preparation was to make sure that you have some of these documents prepared in advance, they're up to date and they're accurate. As we said, start with if it's an solicited proposal and there's no template or prescribed format on the website, start with this executive summary. Remember, you're not trying to bombard people with this on day one. No one is going to read. Start with an executive summary, especially where it's the initial discussions. If it's a funder where you've had relationships with, this also usually works, because they already know you, they already know what they've done together with you. If you have another program idea, you're likely to send maybe a slightly longer summary. But for those of you who are starting to engage these funders, remember we said we've never gotten a contact, even with cold calling, there's some sort of initial contact that we've done. Just do this executive summary. Who you are, what you've done, what you're trying to do, how you're going to do it, your team, your impact, and how it aligns with whatever it is that they're doing. This can actually be done in a very simplified way. Use diagrams where possible so you reduce the amount of text. Track record, remember there's the bios of your team, what you've done previously or done there currently. Use photos, so if you're really helping these entrepreneurs, there's a photo that shows you doing something. You know, make it clean, neat, and easy and interesting for someone to say, oh, okay, quickly read through the 2 to 5 pager and either say, yes, we are interested, send us more information, or no, we are not interested, maybe wait till later. Then once we have that go ahead, remember at this particular point, then prepare the detailed proposal. And as we said, always start with the question of, do you have a template or would you like us to use our own? What minimum information will you require? Funders will be happy to tell you, at least make sure you've included this and everything else. Then do your executive, your detailed summary. So your detailed proposal rather will have everything you've done as an executive summary. So your previous 2 to 5 pager, shorten it, have it as the executive summary, maybe 1 page maximum. You don't need to put everything there because you'll already have time to go into detail about you defining your problem, your solution. Have you done any research, or have you worked with people? Do you have case studies, your own or other people's that you can include? Methodology, your approach to addressing these issues, how you're going to do it, team and track record. Remember, we don't back the horse, we back the rider. What does that mean? You can have a good idea, but you're the wrong person to implement it. So what the funder hears is, oh, this is good idea. This is a good idea, but let me see who else is doing this. So team and track record is very important. The strategy document we did in internal preparation, showing your milestones and what you want to achieve. Financials that we did in internal preparations, that showing what it is you're doing and justifies the ask, why you need X and for how long. And it's easy for a funder to see, if I give you X, it will give you a runway from point A to point B in your strategy, or to point C. So at least I'm comfortable enough to know if I give you this, you will be busy fundraising instead of doing the project. And then M&E, people want information, people want data, people want reports. So as said, use diagrams, pictures, video links wherever possible. Now, common terms in documents, especially in the grant documents that you might receive. You'll find that these are certain common terms. They'll have different names, different titles, but what I've tried to do is just make it simple enough so that we are able to understand exactly what is meant. So usually whenever you get your grant agreement, it'll have a description of what the project is, what you agreed, the results framework, how you're going to be getting data about how the program is being implemented and how this is going to be tracked. There are different types of grants. So we have what we call open grants or unrestricted grants. Basically, they're giving you the funding. You can use it towards a program to address various aspects of the program. What they'll require is just for you to ensure that you're able to provide the documentation for it. So you can use it for like the program aspects, operational aspects. So it's basically an open grant. Then on the extreme end, we have what we call the restricted grant. Now, a restricted grant just says you can only use this money for this. So a restricted grant could be, you can only use this restricted grant to hire a full-time M&E employee. So you cannot use that funding for other things. And the moment you do that, you'll be in breach of your agreements. So that money that you're being given can only be used to hire full-time M&E employee. What that M&E employee does in terms of his duties, you've already specified, you maximize on that employee, but you just can't use that money. Then you have what we call our quasi grants. Our quasi will say you can only use it for operations, but how you use it for operations, it's entirely up to you. But so long as you give us the information and of how it was used, you have the receipts or the documentation, that's fine. Grant amount. So there's normally sometimes a difference between what has been committed and what is actually received. And the reason for this is sometimes you have what you call a fiscal sponsor because you're fundraising in a country where you're not recognized as a maybe a tax exempt organization. So your fiscal sponsor will take a certain percentage as fees for helping you do the fundraising. So it's always clear, it's always important for you to understand based on what is committed, how that will actually be, how much of that will actually be received. Payment schedules. Whenever grants are provided, there's a process that activates the granting, especially for those of you who are starting. They are called funding milestones. So the grant will say, upon signing this agreement, maybe X% of the grant will be made available. Upon giving us the first maybe report, X% of the grant will be deliverable. Then, so what happens is every time you reach that milestone, you activate the next drawdown, okay? So you're basically being told when you reach this milestone, you activate this. What this does is it's a risk mitigation mechanism, okay? That is why it is done or structured this way. A person who's funding you wants to know, if anything goes wrong with the program or with you as an accelerator or hub, I'll be able to say, I have not exposed the entire grant to risk because I'm doing it based on you having achieved the milestones that you set to achieve. So I can justify, we gave 40% of the grant because whatever happened thereafter, for that 40%, you had met those milestones. And why is this the case? Remember, grant, like any other investors, they are funded by other people. Some organizations, they might be part of a big organization, so maybe 1% of their revenues given from that organization, or others are funded by other people so that they can fund you. So it's important to understand that. So the important thing is to understand what these milestones are, what it means for you, and then again, I like going back to this, how it helps you achieve this. So it helps you plan your cash flows and plan how your program is going to be executed. Reporting, a lot of reporting. So like I said, understand if they have templates. If not, generate one, get it approved in advance so that you're not always coming to be told, oh, add this, remove this. It helps you time-wise. Understand what the schedules are. Some might say, we want monthly, but we can ask you for ad hoc reports. Okay, if you want ad hoc reports, how much lead time do I have? Others might say there are certain reports we will need, progress reports, financial reports. So what type of reports are you asking? Is it how the money is being used? Is it how the program is proceeding? Is it M&E? Do they combine? Are they separate? Get clarity on that. So how the funds are used, like we said, the scope is normally defined. You can use the funds for this. So for some of you, when you receive the funding, because maybe you're not going to use all of it immediately, even as you receive it on milestone, some grants will say, okay, you can put this in an interest-bearing account or a money market fund, but that interest that you generate has to be used for the program. So you can't suddenly generate that interest and say, hey, okay, let's pay for office expenses if it's not part of what was approved before. So it's very important for you to understand what happens. Some say that once you receive the funding, you might have incurred expenses towards the program previously before the funding was granted. And they say, even though we say the funding we've given you is for the program, you can't use it for retrospective costs. That's for you to deal with. This one is for upcoming costs in accordance to what has been agreed. And when the due date is done, so usually you're given funding and you can draw it down within a certain period. Once that period ends, any money that you've not used, they'll ask you to return it to them. You don't just get to keep it because you've not finished what you were supposed to do. Or you can actually go back and say, for reasons because you've been communicating, they understand and they're able to extend this. We've already discussed this. Some grants will be given to you so that it allows you to subcontract, because we understand sometimes as hubs and accelerators, you might not have all the capacity internally. So what this does is it gives you permission to subcontract someone else to help you execute that particular program. The other things are anti-bribery and anti-corruption clauses, and on publicity. Some will say, if you get this grant from us, we'll be at liberty to use your pictures or extracts from your report, however we want for our funders. Others will say, we can't put my picture as a funder or a logo without my permission or things like that. So it's important. Then another thing is something we call key man risk in investments, but it's also there in some grants. Some grants might say, if we are going to give you this money to execute this program, there are certain people you said who are going to be with you. This person still have to be there at least for the duration of the program, or at least for a certain portion of the duration of the program. Then the other aspect is something we call no double funding. So this is interesting because you can go out to look for money for a particular program, then that funder takes loan, you get someone else, and then when this funder has already committed, then this funder comes back to fund the program. Now, double funding is interesting. Double funding can be in a scenario where if your program is fully funded, the person who funded the program wants to know that you're not trying to raise additional funding for that program because they provided you everything. However, there are those who will be able to say, we can only provide 50% go find a matching grant, and that sort of works. So I think that's important for us to know. Know your funder, and I know I'm just rushing through this, then I'll do the questions later. The same way your funder is due diligencing you, you also due diligence your funder. Find out what their sources of capital are. So are they raising funds? Do their funds come from an organization, say for example, MasterCard or Google, or is it a family office, say like a Gideas? What are their sources of capital? Because it also helps you understand sort of their processes internally, and it helps you also understand the reason why some of their areas of focus might be particular sectors or certain ticket sizes. Find out their funding terms and conditions and types, as we've described before. Are they giving other value adds? Other than money, what else can you do? Can you open network doors for me? Will you be able to maybe help me with some human resource and skills? What else can you give me? Can you give me linkages to other hubs and accelerators elsewhere? Can you give me resources like materials, access to research? This is something people tend to forget to ask. Look at the track record of your funder. Who have they done with what and how did that work? One of the things is go on their websites, they probably have this information. Go to the ground, talk to the people who worked with that funder. What were the positives? What were the negatives? What do you need to prepare for? It's important for you to get that background done. And then this we'd already covered. What is their funding process and how long does it take? So we've already talked about due diligence, and I just want to go quickly over what is required from you. Essentially, due diligence is time sensitive because remember, funders have targets also. There are certain amounts that have to be disbursed within a certain year. So if it takes too long for you, once you've been given the approval, it's frustrating for them, and they can actually pull out and say, hey, if you're not prepared, let's just go deal with other people. So it's important for you to ensure that you have a key contact person who will be dedicated, or at least their role in whatever else they're doing is to focus on ensuring that they're able to give the information that is required. As we talked about internal prep yesterday, the documents that you've done, upload them into a virtual folder, so a Google Drive, or if it's a Dropbox, just make sure your documents are there and well arranged, so it's not an information dump. If it's financials, have a folder for financials, have a small sheet that says, these are the documents in financials. If it's legals, so arrange your information and make sure it is accurate, up to date, and final versions. I can't tell you how many times you go to do DD, then you find version 4 of this, and then when you've already started reviewing that document, someone comes and says, oh, no, we had updated. Then you end up with a version 8. Up to date, some people are talking about documents that are no longer relevant, and I know it takes long, right? But allow me to take you back to this, what we did. Whenever you have this strategy, document, review, up to and update, repeat. So there's no excuse for you to say it's taken us 15 or 20 months to get this funder, that's why the document is out of date. No, you've been internally updating and reviewing it to see whether or not it still reflects your strategy. So we already talked about this, so I won't delve into it. Financial due diligence is your financial performance, accuracy of your reports, how much cash runway you have, whether you have the right processes or the right control frameworks, how is money moved within the organization. Commercial due diligence is how have you performed in the past, if it's something that you've been doing, what is the strategy, how are you guys executing it, who's the team. Legal, we covered are you correctly registered? Do you have the right licenses? Are you being sued by people? So potential legal risks are being identified. And then reputational, we said if you've had corruption or fraud issues, it's important. So what I'll do is I'll stop there. We were supposed to do some role play, but I think we might not be able to do that. Anyone with a question?
Anyone with a question? Maybe maybe there was an area that you feel was not covered, or you didn't understand.
Any clarifications that you'd like? Oh, Elishiba said she'd raised her hand by mistake.
Yeah,
So,
it's okay.
Any other questions? Anything you'd like to clarify? So Mbogwa has raised her hand. Let me see. Wanjiru, are you able to unmute yourself? We've allowed you to unmute. Or maybe you can chat your question if you're not able to.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we
Yes.
can hear you. Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Very good.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for a very interesting and useful presentation. My question was around the double funding conversation. If you could just go over that again. I think I remember you mentioned something about 50%, but kindly go over that again.
Okay, I definitely will do that. Thank you, Wanjiru. Okay, so what I'll do is let me answer that, and then there's a question by Eric Karaoke. So on the double funding, just for clarity, so whenever you reach out to funders for you to get funding for your programs, Wanjiru, once you've gotten funding for that, there's no sense in you getting additional funding for the same program if what the funder had initially given you has covered all aspects. However, that particular funder, say if you needed $1 million and they've only given you $500,000, then because they've only covered 50% of the program cost, they'll be able to come and say, it is okay for you to go and get a matching grant. Because what we've done is provided you only with half. We've only provided you with 50% of the funding required. So it's possible for you to go out and get the additional 50% as a matching grant. I hope that clarifies it.
Yes, and then Eric Karaoke has asked, some funders ask for concept notes or a 500 narration of an idea at the onset. How do you deal with this?
Okay, so what you do is whenever they ask for, when you say 500 narration, what is a 500 narration? I don't quite understand. Maybe Eric, we can unmute you.
Hello, Eric, are you there?
Because we're not quite clear what, 500 words. Thank you. Okay.
Okay.
So whenever they ask you for a concept note of 500-word narration, essentially what they're trying to see is, what are you trying to do and how does it relate to us? So if we go to the presentation, and I'll just see if I can just share that with you. If we go to the presentation, 500 words, there's not a lot you can do with that. So what the funder is essentially telling you is, just get to the point. So what I'd focus on is the need you're trying to address, how you're going to address it. So here, the need you're addressing, how you're going to address, and how it aligns with the objectives. That's, I think, what you should focus on. I hope that helps. I think, I don't know if we have any other questions. Okay,
Hello, there's another question.
Mm-hmm.
There's another question from Collins. A question on matching grants. What happens in the event you are not able to secure the other 50% funding? Does that mean the program remains in limbo?
Okay, so one of the things that some funders have started to do is look at, if they've given you X and it is not sufficient for you to be able to meet your program objectives, what they'll do is they'll say you cannot draw down until you're able to get the matching grant, right? So what happens in that scenario, you won't be able to even access the initial funding that came in, because that funder has seen there's a risk of you not being able to achieve your project to the extent that we think is important. And because as a funder, I have restrictions in terms of how much I can give, I'm not willing to take the risk of having a project start and then stop halfway, because you will not have met my objectives and it will not really add up to the KPIs that I have. So yes, it is possible if you're unable to get a matching grant, then the program does not start. However, there are other funders who say, it's okay. What you can do with this 50% or with this 30% that we're giving you, they'll tell you, go with the program that you have, reduce it to fit within this amount that we have given you. So reduce its scope rather to fit within this amount that we've given you, so that whereas before you'd have done maybe the same program on $1 million budget, you're now being told try and work within 400 or 500,000. So what happens is some where possible, because sometimes it's not possible because of the scope of the project, but where possible, what a hub or accelerator does is you break it down into either phases, or you just do a smaller scope. And then the smaller version of that, you just make sure that you and your funder are aligned in terms of the M&E matrix and the impact matrix that the funder wanted, whether it was the number of jobs or the number of people who were interacted with. Okay, I think there's
another question.
Yes, please go ahead. Yes.
How do you manage consortium-based fundraising where the funder would like more than one hub involved in the application process?
Okay, so with regards to the consortium-based funding, I think what happens is every funder will come up with the, oh, I see the question. So if the funders ideally are asking for a consortium because there's something or a gap that they're trying to fill. So the first thing I try and understand is, why are they asking you to come in as a consortium? Try and understand what they're trying, or what gap they're trying to address. It could be skills or capacity. So skills and capacity, maybe a certain hub has very good financial management structures and policies, another one has a good team. It could be that. It could be that individual hubs are so small, it does not make commercial sense for them to give each of the individual hubs that funding. So what they're saying is, if these hubs or accelerators can come together, then ideally they're able to give a bigger ticket size for you guys to be able to achieve what it is that you set out to do. So in that process, what I'd say is, as hubs and accelerators, as you're coming together as a consortium, please have a discussion in terms of how are we going to work together, who is going to deal with what, and most importantly, have that documented, you know. So how is the funding going to come in? Is it a joint account with 3 signatures for each of the hubs? How are we going to be dealing with the people who were working under the program? Who deals with what aspect? So I think it's important to have that framework up and running.
That's thanks. Now there's also another question from Masim Shai. I would like you to address the concerns where a pandemic like COVID-19 affects the activities timelines, hence the project per se.
Okay, thank you for that, Marcy. And we had actually just covered this in detail yesterday. So what I'll do is I'll also pull up the slide. So some of you might have already received funding for specific programs, and the funding might have been paused for a particular reason, maybe because your funder was not able to follow through on some of the aspects with regard to the next funding milestones, as you might have discussed. So one of the things that we'll say is, if it was a funder you are working with, it's important for you to keep that communication channel open. The reason we say this is, once you've established that relationship, the person who has actually given you the first, or has given you that funding, is someone you want to keep close. So even if they're having challenges, you don't just throw them to the side or stop dealing with them. These people took a risk, they worked with you. The same way you'd have had challenges and they'd continue to give you time to sort yourself, give them time, because this crisis was unforeseen, and it has meant not only an impact on the accelerators and hubs, but even some of the funders. They are not able to draw down as they had anticipated. So an understanding on both sides and communication on both sides is important, because both of you are stakeholders to each other. So with regards to funding, what you need to understand is, for COVID, depending on the grant funding that you had received. If it was grant funding with regards to which has certain restrictions, and that grant funding is almost done, or you're not able to apply to certain areas of the program, take an analysis and say, am I able to deliver this program aspects based on the restrictions that the grant funding had? Because like we said, some grant funding might be only for the full-time employees, but you don't have funding to actually execute the program on the ground. Go back to the funder and tell them, yes, your funding is able to pay for maybe an employee, but I am unfortunately not able to continue the program because of these other restrictions or things that might be happening on the ground. Look at also your revenue and cost milestones and overlay that with a strategy of what you need to do for your program funding. This is what we were saying. What are your milestones for that 1 year? So take these milestones for your program, overlay them on this sort of chart and say, if I'm executing this program, to what point can I reasonably reach before I am unable to continue? And continuation is based on, am I expecting additional revenue? Do I have visibility on revenue? And we discussed revenues yesterday in detail in terms of not only grant-based, but what else you can do. Look at what costs are required for you to, at a bare minimum, be able to deliver that program. If you're not able to, then just communicate to your funders and the people who are part of the program participants in terms of the challenges you're facing and what the way forward you think would be for them. So that is the feedback I'd give in terms of COVID. I think I'm done, and I know we had started slightly late, but we are now also over time. Unless there's a burning question, I'd like to hand it back to Anne. Any other questions, or can I just hand it back to Anne? All right, so Anne, let me hand it over back to you, but thank you very much for your questions. We'll be sharing the slides, and I hope that the session has been informative for you, and thank you for taking time on a public holiday to join us. Thank you all for participating. Thank you for taking time. ASEC will be sharing the slides for yesterday and today and the recording, but I really appreciate you. Thank you for taking time on a public holiday, and I hope the sessions were informative. If you need to reach out to me, my emails are on the presentations. So thank you, and allow me to wish you a wonderful long weekend and success in your future fundraising initiatives. Thank you very much. Bye.